This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason, so if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But most importantly,
may you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
skepticize everything.
There are a lot of dots on that wall. I've just been staring at my computer screen, trying to figure out some way to start talking. I feel once I actually get the ball rolling and my mouth starts moving, maybe something will come out, but still nothing is quite hitting me. You know, when I first started this podcast, this was back 2 years ago from when this episode comes out, I had a very hard line that I didn't cross. There was the personal life and work life and everything I did on one side of the digital veil. And then there was the podcasting persona. And that was just the person that you came to know. It didn't take long for that line to break down. And I think it was maybe episode 6 or 7. I had a friend that was getting married to somebody that I don't think he was right for, because he had recently come back from his mission, and, you know, I was frustrated at it, and I didn't want to see my friend make a bad decision because it was motivated reasoning behind it. That's the first time that this line blurred between the two separate lives, and since then, it's been utterly non-existent. And it brings me to a question, and that's, who is your family? Is your family the people you share blood with? Is your family your friends? Your family the people you spend the most time with? Because my family I've spent very little time with, as is the case with most adults. Once you move on and move many miles away and you start living your life, it's, you know, hi, nice to see you. It's Thanksgiving. See you in a month for Christmas. All right. See you in 11 months for Thanksgiving next year. So what is family really? Because the people that I have called my family for so long, I feel a disconnect when I speak with them now. And it's not a bad thing. It's just an existent disconnect. There's no way really to describe it. But I just spent this last Friday at a get-together at Squatter's Pub. And it was just something that I posted up on the Facebook page and said, hey, come out to Squatter's Pub if you don't have anything you're doing on Friday night. It'd be great to see you. And every single person there, I felt like I could have a much deeper and more intellectual and personal conversation than I have ever had with any of my family members. So who is your family? Who do you call your family? Can somebody go from being part of your family to not part of your family? I don't think so. I think family is what you consider it. Family is a very fluid word. Calling somebody my brother or my sister, right? That's, you know, Brother Henderson, Brother Tanner, Sister Schmidt. Hey, you know, people of all ages, ethnicities call each other brother and sister when they're not related by blood. What does that mean? What does that word family mean? You know? Is it the mafia family? The family you don't turn your back on? Is it the people you surround yourself with on a day-to-day basis? Is it just a single significant other? That's your family. I'll tell you what kind of brings me onto this, let's say, unconventional introduction to this episode. I've recently spent a fair amount of time in Utah, as I said earlier, and it was a very interesting time. This past week and a half has been something I never knew I would experience or never thought I would experience, and I have emerged from the other side with just a blurry mind from everything that's happened and a loss of words to describe it. Let me backtrack. I think it was last episode I mentioned to everybody that I'm going to head out to Mythicist, Milwaukee. They have the myth information debate between Bart Ehrman and Robert Price. This seminal debate on whether Jesus was a historical being or actually just a mythical legend that was created, fabricated out of whole cloth by somebody. And it was great. It was a fantastic conference. But while I was at the conference, there was something weighing on me. I'll get to that. And it was nothing substantial. I was capable of ignoring it for the entire time. And I had more fun at Myth Information than I think I've had at any conference. It was just a great time hanging out with these people that I have known for so long and only have met through cyberspace or meeting new people that I've never met before. I got to actually meet Marie Kent in person and Joel Kuhn. You'll know Marie Kent from the host of My Book of Mormon podcast. I co-host with her and we just have so much fun. And Joel Kuhn, the guy who created the DC, the Doctrine and Covenants comparison, he was there. David Michael, the old host of the My Book of Mormon podcast, was there. Andrew Torres of Opening Arguments and Thomas Smith of Every Podcast Ever were all there. It was a wonderful time to hang out with these people and feel so invited and comfortable. I could say I felt like anything that I wanted to and not be worried for offense or, and I'll just say it. Alcohol is a social lubricant, isn't it? They say that it is, and I just can't agree more with that saying because there's something about when you are spending time with people whose company you enjoy and you drink alcohol together, there's just something about it that unlocks something inside of us. It makes it so we can talk and laugh and have fun and talk about whatever without any inhibitions or fears of judgment. And it was so great to just be spending time in that atmosphere with such wonderful and open-minded and open-armed people. I feel like I've made a lot of new friends now. And I guess that's kind of where my initial question comes into place is, who is your family? So I end up driving back to Chicago with David Michael. And this was the night that the Cubs won the pennant and went to the World Series. Now, if you follow sports, you do more so than I. I don't follow sports ever. I've never watched baseball ever with any sort of intent ever. And this is the first time I've ever watched baseball. And to be in Chicago when they won that game, electricity was just in the air. It was palpable. You could feel the energy. People, it was the loudest I have ever seen any single place. And we were just in a bar in the suburbs of Chicago. We weren't even in Wrigleyville or anything. And it was just amazing, just electrifying to be with so many people that are all watching the same game and all feeling the same emotions when, they scored the first double play. And it was just an amazing beginning to a great way to kick off the first inning. And, I'd never felt that before. I'd never been into sports enough to actually feel like I can, gather with a room full of other people and say, wow, these people, They feel like family. We're all shouting, we're all booing, or we're all getting excited at the same exact things. We all share this same mind, and everybody is just nice and happy and excited, and I mean, just energetic, and it's so much fun. And that's, the first time I ever experienced something like that. So then after that, I flew into Colorado. And I just stayed there one night because I was just picking up a car that I've had there in storage that I'm bringing up to Seattle. If you guys can tell now, the line between my personal life and the podcast persona is completely evaporated by this point. I try not to do this too much, but yet, my God, if you don't want to hear this, please just skip this episode. There's one coming up in another few days. Another episode will come out in a few days. Just skip this, but I just have to, I guess, unload. I have to talk about this past week and a half, because it's all I can think about right now. So I flew into Colorado, and that's where I was able to spend the night with a friend that I haven't seen in quite some time. This is the same friend who I lived with, basically one of the first people that I moved out of my parents' basement and began living with. This was a great friend that I grew up next door to him. And it was just so fun to see him again. We just sat around and played video games for a night, and it's so relaxing to hang out with this guy just because I feel so comfortable. I consider him family. He's my brother. And we share the same interests, the same sense of humor. And, it's like one of those friends from high school that no matter when you hang, that you just feel exactly like you were hanging out yesterday. It's just, we were cracking the same jokes, laughing at the same stupid things. It was just so much fun. And then I drove back to Utah. And the initial plan was for me to stay one night in Utah because it's I think 18 hours to get from Colorado to Seattle, and that's not a day's drive. So I was planning on driving to Utah, staying a night, and then driving home to Seattle. But then I got the phone call while I was in Chicago. My grandma had died. And at this level, she's been in a fair amount of pain for a while. She's, 86 years old. It's time. And everybody in our family knew it. She'd been in the hospital for a couple of days, and everybody knew she was this was her time. And it was a sweet release to have her go. But she's the most wonderful grandma ever. And hopefully this explains why there was no podcast out last week, because on Thursday, the day that I usually release a podcast, it was a funeral. And then I had to go see my family. Family, that's the word, right? that's a challenging word. What is family at this level? Because I spent time, I had just spent nearly an entire week with friends, with people that I have called my family for so long because they share the same interests as me, because they accept me for who I am. And then Thursday comes along and I make my way to a church. I haven't stepped foot in a Mormon church for so long. This is the first time in forever. And I haven't seen most of these cousins or aunts and uncles or any of these family members, most of them for half a decade, some of them for even longer. And it's weird. It's just so weird, because family is just this this inclusive term, right? A family member is somebody you can throw your arms around and say, I love you, and it's just so good to see you. There were only certain people there that I felt like I could do that with. There were only certain people that I felt like I knew that I could call my family. They were all my family. They share the same blood as I have. But are they really family? I don't know. That's where I'm having a hard time with this term in and of itself, family. What is that? Because I considered everybody that I had seen the week before to be a family member. And then I'm in a room with people that I've called family my whole life. And I no longer relate to any of them. Well, let me take that back. Because there were a couple that I felt like I could relate to. There are some of my family members that have been considered the black sheep of their family, whether it's been, mistakes that they've made in their past life, or they've, at some point in their timeline, they've departed from the church. But they've all come back. The vast majority of them have come back anyway. But it was interesting to talk to those family members that I could relate to more, the ones that have pulled away from the church at some point and then come back. It feels like they had some level of deeper empathy for conversation points that we were discussing. It was not anything specific that we talked about. It was just their body language and how they acknowledged, what I'm doing with my life right now. But the thing is a lot of people listening to this show, a lot of ex-Mormons or ex-religious people listening to this show right now might have the same situation where they go to, a family function, a reunion or a funeral or a wedding or something, and they see their family members and they're estranged. And I don't want to convey that sense because it was nothing like that. Many people that are ex-Mormon have to deal with it to a much greater degree. They have to deal with a shunning that I've never had to understand. I've never experienced to any sort of level like they have. And for those people, it may be harder to relate to exactly what I'm talking about. And I don't even know exactly how to express what's bouncing around in my head right now. But some of my family were actually curious about what I do. Some of them actually asked questions about how I'm able to make a living by being an anti-Mormon, basically. Let me back this up. I mean, the vast majority of these family members know what I do, or they have been told through the grapevine that, Bryce, he does a podcast, or he's telling anti-Mormon lies, or whatever the case may be. And I did have one cousin approach me and say, I looked at your website and, I wasn't sure really what to think about it. And I said, well, did you listen to the podcast at all? Because the website's just the beginning. And she said no. And, I think, I don't know what to think about that specifically. That's interesting to look at a website that's based on a podcast and not listen to the podcast. But just to be turned off by, the pictures on the website, the picture of the Mormon church and it says Naked Mormonism on it. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of anything on the website that would chase away a believer. But I did have this discussion with a few people. One of which was with this cousin, and this cousin was great. We spoke for maybe 45 minutes about her time in the church when she left and she kind of broke away and she began, engaging in the party scene a little bit and in the life of sin and whatnot. And, she got married and she came back into the church and she now has a bunch of kids and they're living a happy life down in southern Utah. And, it was so good to talk to her because she showed me a level of human empathy that nobody else in the family expressed, because I feel like she understood where I was coming from. She understood my journey so much better, and she was willing to listen. No matter what I would say, she would listen to it and respond to what I was saying. She wasn't waiting for me to shut up so she could talk. She would actually engage in the conversation, and it was one of the best conversations I had while there. It was fun talking to her about church and about life and about raising kids in the church. Her kids are much more progressive, millennial children, and they're growing up in a generation where church doesn't have as much of an impact on people as it used to, I think. And they're smart kids. It was fun to sit and speak with these cousins once removed, these cousins that are younger than me, but not by much because I was the youngest cousin of my generation. It was fun, a lot of fun to talk to these people. Then there was this interaction that I had with my uncle. And actually, this is the same uncle and aunt who are currently serving their mission for the church. And I was able to get him to start talking about church history, because the thing is, he's currently serving this mission in Kirtland, and he is diving into the history there because it's all so real and tangible. You know, he'll be sweeping up, dust where Joseph Smith was standing preaching from a pulpit. I mean, he's actually touching the history that these people that I'm studying about actually created. It's remarkable. He's closer to the history than I am. And he's learned so much about Mormon history in his almost year's time now on this mission. It's unbelievable how much he knows. To the point that I was astounded. I was speechless a few times, talking about the sawmill, the steam mill eventually that it became in Kirtland, because they wanted to manufacture paper there and lumber. It was never profitable in 1837, and then, of course, at the end of 1837, Joseph and Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young and everybody was chased out of Kirtland, and they were, they found refuge in far west Missouri, never to return to Kirtland again. And this uncle began to tell me about a potash factory, basically, that they were creating, because apparently potash was used in that day and age, for all kinds of things. And when I tried to implore as to what kinds of things more, I didn't really understand it very well. I don't know what the deal was, but it was a precious commodity in the 1830s, and it probably is still today. And the potash factory mill, I guess you could call it, in Kirtland is one of the facilities that my uncle has been maintaining, basically. And he couldn't help but just tell me everything about this potash and the sawmill that they were working on, because he'd just gotten the sawmill up and running again. He shot a video of the sawmill running, and apparently, he told me this when they first created the sawmill, they made it so it would move at 2 revolutions per second, and it ended up vibrating the building off of its foundation because it was too much weight, because everything is just thick wood structure. So it burned down in 1838, and then they reconstructed it back in, I believe it was 2002. And I'm getting all of this from memory from talking to my uncle. And they were able to get it up and working again. When they reconstructed it in early 2000, apparently they used some wrong parts, or something was wrong with it and it wasn't functioning. So my uncle has been spending the last 3 or 4 months fixing it and getting it to work. And now the sawmill runs. It actually works. And not only that, when they were using it in 1837, trying to make money off of it, the water couldn't spin it because it was too much weight. So they hooked up a steam engine to it, and it was never profitable. But my uncle was able to get it to where the actual water wheel spins the sawmill and actually powers it. It's just amazing to see this video. But it was more amazing to be talking to my uncle, because he had the same exact glint and excitement in his eye talking about Mormon history that I do. And maybe that was the point that the conversation kind of turned for me, where I realized that this is not a debate. This is not, trying to prove or disprove the legitimacy of the Mormon Church. This is 2 history nerds talking about our shared history. That's all it was. My uncle and I were just as excitedly talking about things that were going on in Kirtland, Ohio. Nothing else mattered. The fact that I'm a non-believer and then he's a believer simply didn't matter. We were having a fun conversation about Mormon history. We were using history to bridge the gap between my firmly believing uncle, who's on his full-time mission, was only able to take a break from the mission because his mother died, and me, who is an anti-Mormon, basically, been labeled, I don't like that phrase, I think it's too simplistic, but an anti-Mormon, speaking together, talking and having a very enlightening and fun conversation. And it wasn't just us in some back room talking. We were in the living room of my grandma's apartment while everybody was there cleaning it out when we were having this conversation. And everybody was spectating. Everybody was watching. You know, they would maybe have their own little side conversations, but our conversation was the focus of the room for nearly an hour. And it was so much fun. Just relating to him with this information that he and I both share. Whether or not Joseph Smith was a real prophet has absolutely zero effect on how cool the sawmill was that they just got up and running again. Whether or not Brigham Young was actually the rightful successor has absolutely no impact on how cool the Zion's Camp March was and how that march impacted the various populations from Ohio through Illinois all the way into Missouri. I mean, the truthfulness of the church doesn't matter when we're talking the history. That's the point that I was able to conclude is, you know what? We're all interested in the history. Why don't we talk about that? I don't care what Thomas S. Monson just said in the last General Conference. I don't care what crazy is. I don't care what Truman Madsen lectures are and how faith-promoting he, claims Joseph Smith was and how witty Joseph was in the cardboard cutout that Truman Madsen constructs for Joseph Smith. It doesn't matter. Joseph always being the answer man and the prophet always having the best idea. Those things don't matter when we're talking about the history of the church. Joseph doesn't have to be a prophet. He's a guy. He's just a guy. That's the best part. And why I think it was so much fun to talk with my uncle, because he could actually have a deep conversation about this. But he was the only one in the room that could. Nobody else in the room knew what we were talking about. They were watching. They were, I would assume, quite curious, but they didn't know. And it just took a certain level of knowledge of the history of the church for my uncle and I to be able to relate and talk and smile at each other and actually connect in a way that he and I have never connected before. He was always just, my uncle on the ranch, I gained a new respect for my uncle too in this conversation, a whole new level of respect that I never knew attainable, because this guy has been researching the Mormon history quite fervently for the past year, maybe a little bit longer, and he's gaining so much knowledge about it, and he's able to engage with it on an intellectual level, and I couldn't believe how excited he was about it. And he could actually engage on an intellectual level with somebody he knows to be the adversary. And it was just a fun conversation. That's all it was. It was just fun to talk to him. So, I go back to that question. Whose family here? There were many people in that room that I think were scared to ask any deeper questions, because who knows what they might learn that might steer them away from the church. And none of them have the time or the motivation or ambition to study their history the way that my uncle has in order to know it so they can engage in a properly intellectual level with somebody like myself who's been researching it from anti-Mormon and pro-Mormon sources. I don't know. I just had this interesting feeling. And, just thinking about this kind of in the abstract, it made me question a bit. I'll get to that question in a second here, but the cleaning out process continued. My grandma lived in this little apartment, and we just, 15 people tackling all of her possessions. It was done pretty quickly. But she had a lot of books. I mean, just an insane number of books. The vast majority were church books produced by apostles or Mormon historians or whoever, and just shelves full of them. I couldn't believe how many books there were. Included through that were The Comprehensive History of the Church. I think that's by Bushman, if I'm not mistaken. The entire 26-volume set of Journal of the Discourses, including an index. The History of the Church, 7 volumes. An insane number of books, including multiple copies of the books that my grandma herself has written, because she's been engaging in historical studies for about the past 17 years, I think. I mean, it's amazing. But just shelves and shelves of books. We found an old hymn book in there that may be from, who knows, the 1860s or something like that. We weren't sure. There's no date on it. I was able to pick up a little book that was, I can't remember it. Hang on. Here it is. It's called Flashes from the Eternal Semaphore. And there is a handwriting in it from 1928. When it was purchased brand new. It's written by Leo J. Muir. This is the opening of it. To the youth of America, the light of 70 centuries illumines your pathway. Yet across that pathway fall shadows that beguile and deceive. Mystic shadows of pleasure, lust, dim shadows of ignorance, lurid shadows of sin. In the firm faith that these flashes from the eternal semaphore will dispel some of those shadows, this volume is dedicated to you. End quote. It's a beautiful book. 1928, leather bound. Wonderful. It's not in the best of shape, but I've never read the book. I've never seen it in my life, but it was on the bookshelf. I just looked at the bookshelf again. I was mistaken that Comprehensive History of the Church is not Bushman, that's B.H. Roberts. But also there was this copy of Voice of Warning that was published probably in the 1960s. It's a little beat up, a little tattered, but this is a voice of warning and instructions to all people. If you're keeping up with our timeline in the history, the historical timeline of the podcast, this book was just written in 1837 by Parley P. Pratt. It was the first full-length book, apologetics manual, basically, written by the church and published in response to Mormonism Unveiled and the other anti-Mormon literature that was circulating like wildfire. I mean, here it is. My grandma had a copy of this in her bookshelf. I can't believe it. The Voice of Warning by Parley P. Pratt. There was a myriad of other books, and my trunk came back full. I mean, luckily I wasn't flying from Salt Lake to Seattle. I was driving my car from Colorado to Seattle, and so I was able to fill up my trunk with books. Just a ton of books, all that were my grandma's. I mean, there's even the full set of the Journal of the Discourses. She had the full set published in, I think it was 1965 or 68 edition. And I opened them up, a couple of them. I mean, they were all in sequential order, 1 through 26. And I opened them up, and you can hear the spine cracking. These Journal of the Discourses have never been opened. They're 1968 edition. They're 1968 books. They've never been touched. Now, the Comprehensive History of the Church, they're in a little bit poorer of shape, but they're slightly older. They're from, I think they're from the early 60s. And then there's the History of the Church volumes, which were, the editions that are there, they were published, I think, in like 72 or something to that effect. And I just grabbed all of these books. But it's not like I went in there and said, all these books are as mine. No, that's not what it was. It was, I went in there and I sifted through. I looked through every single book. I held it. I opened every book that was in that house. And I offered them to people. Do you want this book? No. Do you want this book? No. Do you want this set of books? No. The only book that was in that entire apartment that was laid dibs on was the old hymn book from sometime in the mid 1800s, which is great. I mean, somebody wanted it and they should rightfully get it. And it's great. I'm so glad that they got that book. But nobody else wanted any books in that apartment. I couldn't believe it. I filled up an entire shopping cart full of books and ran them out to the trunk of my car and filled it up with them. The one anti-Mormon in that entire apartment, the one person that doesn't believe that the church is true, and I'm the one that wanted all the church books. Does that seem odd to anybody else? Every person standing in the apartment, except for myself, knows that church to be the one true church. And if they don't believe in that church, that they will not get to the celestial kingdom. They will not be able to see Jesus and Joseph and God and the Holy Ghost on the judgment panel on the last days. They will not make the first resurrection. They will spend an eternity in the celestial kingdom knowing that they could have had something better. Or, if they're like me, outer darkness. Right? It's absurd. I couldn't believe it. There were, at any given time, there were 10 to 15, maybe 20 other people in that apartment, and nobody there wanted any of these books. If you believe this is the one true church, that if you don't live by the tenets of this church, you will not get to the kingdom of God, why wouldn't you want to know everything about it? That's my greatest question. Why wouldn't you want to read through every one of those books? Through The Voice of Warning, this thing was published in 1837. It's in terrible shape, and I'm shaking it right now out of exasperation. But why wouldn't you want to read this thing? It's less than 250 pages. And it teaches you a ton of knowledge about the church and about the apologetics of the church. And you know, how amazing of a person Joseph Smith is. Why wouldn't somebody want to read that? The Journal of the Discourses, there are 26 volumes there. The spines crack as you open the books. My grandma's 86, and she bought those books who knows when. They were 1960, I think 68 production. They've never been opened. My grandma died knowing this is the one true church, and she didn't read through the Journal of Discourses. Nowhere else, no other single volume set of books will teach you more about Mormon religion than the Journal of Discourses, and nobody there wanted them, except for me. I can't wrap my mind around that. It's like, if this is the true church, and I would want to know everything about it, right? I would want to do everything I possibly could to learn every aspect of this church. And I brought this point up to one of my family members, and she responded by saying, well, you have the time to research these things. We really don't have the time. You know, you study the history of it. You know it on kind of a clinical level. And I said, that's simply not true. I don't just study the history. I listen to conference talks frequently. I study the history that's as recent as 30 years old with Mark Hoffman. I study things that are very recent, current day studies. I just didn't, well, I don't know. I don't think I've even talked about mormonsandgays.lds.org. Has anybody seen this site? This is the church's new face, their new way to say, hey, we are not homophobic. It's just that people that are gay should live celibate lives, and, yeah, they'll be happy. It's horrible. It's absolutely disgusting. They're trying to repackage their homophobic ways, and just look it up, mormonsandgays.lds.org. They have video testimonials of people there. It's disgusting. It's horrendous to have them labeling it as same-sex attraction when people are gay. It's not called same-sex attraction. It's called gay, and it's just who the people are. Okay? It's not them sinning. It's not them having an attraction that is of the devil. No, it's simply who they are. I'm studying the church from all angles. I'm trying to understand it from all possible angles. If this is the one true church, why wouldn't they want to They're the ones that believe that this is the true church, and they are scared to engage at the level that I'm engaging. Or God forbid, even the level that my uncle is engaging, at least he's learning it all from the missionaries and the other people that are there in Kirtland working in the church's visitor center. So he gets to learn the history from a sanitized, simplistic view. But he still is understanding the history. He's still engaging with it. But nobody else in that apartment that believes this is the true church cares to put that effort in? Is this obsession on my part? Is that what this is? Am I just hopelessly obsessed, insatiably craving more history? Is it my problem? Is it a failing on my part because I'm the one that wants to learn everything about this church? Am I supposed to not understand the history of the church and only understand the newest, most recent things and just believe whatever they say every 6 months in General Conference? I mean, is that how fluid my belief system is, that I should ignore, every 6 months when General Conference comes on, I ignore whatever I've known of the church the 6 months previous to that because they're spouting new revelation from the pulpit constantly? It's absurd. How can we understand the church today if we don't look at the history? It's a huge disconnect. That's a chasm that divides the understanding of the believing Mormon. And the few people I was able to engage with, it was beautiful to have them think that way, to have them open up a little bit, to have, at least have an open mind that there might be something about the history that I don't know that this anti-Mormon's about to teach me. That is probably the most remarkable interaction I've ever had with my family members, my blood family members. And, I guess that kind of brings it back to family, doesn't it? These people who I've known to be my family for my entire life, I've never felt further apart from them than I have felt in the past 5 years. And we were able to come together and actually spend time as family members and talk like human beings to each other. It didn't matter what I do for a living. We were able to just talk about the time we were at the ranch and we'd go jumping motorcycles in the cattle field. Going shooting prairie dogs. You just, sleeping out on the trampoline under the stars. We had so much fun together as a family. But these people, by this fluid definition of the word family, haven't really been what I would call my family for a long time. The people that I receive emails in from, the people that I spoke to at Myth Information and at this hangout last Friday at Squatters, those are the people I've considered my family for the past, since I started doing this, since I started engaging in the world of atheism and ex-Mormonism. Those are the people that I've always known to be my family. And maybe I'm looking at this too simplistically, right? Maybe it's a failing of my own perspective by saying family should either be your blood or the people you surround yourself with, because those are two very different things. But maybe it's both. Just because these family members and I don't see eye to eye, it doesn't mean that we have to be estranged from each other. Just because I have a different understanding of the church history than they do, doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. It was a shame to see some of my cousins who would barely even, talk to me, would barely even engage in a conversation. I don't know what it was. Maybe I kind of hit the nail on the head earlier. It was out of fear that they might learn something that makes them question their testimony. Because obviously, if I've left, that I've come into that kind of information, maybe that's the first thing that I'll tell them. And it's a reasonable fear, I guess, for the believing mind. Self-preservation. That's kind of how I see it, acting out of self-preservation. I don't blame them. But the point I want to get at here is, family can be such a fluid term, and I love my family. Whether they're my blood relatives that I haven't seen in half a decade, or whether they were, Steve and Sue and Darren and Gazama Lee and Andrea and Doug and Caitlin and Tristan and Brandon and Heather and Tyler and David and Randy on the phone later and Preston and Andrew and Joey and Julianne and all these people. I'm missing a bunch of names there that I was surrounded by on Friday. We were all talking about Mormon history. We were all talking about our experiences in the church. I felt more welcome there than I've ever felt being with my blood relative family. But family, I guess, it's much more of a broad term in that respect. I love all of them. I love everybody that I was able to spend time with on Friday. And I love everybody I was able to see on Thursday that I haven't seen in many years. And that's why I think I began blurring the line around episode 6 with this podcast. Because, I had my personal life and my podcaster life. And when they come into conflict with each other, it can definitely be a bad thing. And I have really tried to not do it. But at this point, the way I see it, I have shared so much with you. You're my family now. I love every single person that listens to this. I love every single person that I'm able to talk to and wrap my arms around and say, hey, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thanks for listening. And, when we first sat down at Squatters, we all went around the table and we told our stories. Everybody kind of voiced their story. And I was so happy to just sit there with my mouth shut and listen, because you've all heard my story now. You're my family, but it's such a one-sided relationship. I want to hear your stories too. And that's what this opportunity was on Friday. Being able to hear from these people that have been listening and actually getting to see them in person and hug them or shake their hand. It was wonderful. It's this level of family that I've never had with any of my family members, but I don't see that as always being the case, because I hugged a lot of my family too on Thursday at the funeral. And a lot of them were, energetic and curious about how things are going for me up in Seattle. How do you like it up there? And, engaging in deeper conversations. Oh, hey, it's good to see you. How's the job out in California going? And, I was able to talk with a lot of my actual blood family members the way that I spoke with my family on Friday night at the Squatters get-together. And I guess it just takes me sitting back here staring at a blank computer screen to draw that equivocation and to say that family isn't just who accepts you. Family can literally mean anybody. My blood relatives are my family. Everybody that listens to this podcast, I consider you part of my family now. And obviously that shows through, because I share everything with you guys at this point. There's nothing I hold back anymore. I as soon as I flip this mic on, I don't know that the filter comes off. I can't control what I say, because I just feel so comfortable, like I'm talking with a family member that I've been talking to for years, that I feel like I grew up with at this point, because I've told you guys so much now. And I love hearing back from you. I love to be sitting across the table from you, each of us with a drink in our hand, and just be talking about our experience in Mormonism and what it's like to be out of the church. Or, what it's like to be shunned by your family. Or to be stuck in an interfaith relationship where one person believes and the other one doesn't. Or to be trying to raise your grandkids to not be influenced by the church when their parents want to indoctrinate them even harder into the church. And everybody has a unique story. Every single person at that table on Friday had something to share that made them a real person, instead of just the person that showed up on Friday. It turned every one of us into a family member with each other. And that's probably the most beautiful aspect of it is, the family can be anybody that you make it at this point. And I've never had as much of appreciation for that as I now have, seeing that the similarities between my Thursday night family and my Friday night family. Now, all of that being said, maybe there's something here that all of us Exmos can do. I mean, I see interactions on Facebook all the time where people are combative talking about Mormon history, or just the church in general, or something that the church is doing, mormonsandgays.lds.org. Maybe there's some blog posts that are going up that are, sparking some controversial discussion. While there is a place for that, that's not how it has to be. It was so much fun talking to all of my family this last week about Mormon history. Every one of you. And every one of my blood family members. It was so good to talk to everyone about it. And maybe that's what I want to, the takeaway that I hope people can pull from this is the history of the church doesn't have to be something that drives a wedge between us. It doesn't have to rip us asunder, but rather it can smash us together. It's a point where we can all engage and be interested and fascinated. The history of the church doesn't have to promote or deconstruct faith. It's just the history. It's just there. It's just the random sequence of events that led the church to be what it is today. Maybe that's the most exciting part about it. And maybe that's why after this week and a half, nearly 2 weeks that I've been gone, I'm so charged up. I'm so happy to feel this connection, this bridge, this fissure that has existed between my believing family members and myself. I feel like Mormon history is the bridge that is spanning that chasm. If you engage excitedly about Mormon history with believing Mormons, they can't help but get interested. When I was talking to Doug at Squatters, Doug is a really cool guy. It was good to meet him actually in person there. He was saying that, when he first started listening to the show and I was using the nicknames, he was annoyed by it, as were, I think, 99% of people listening to this, because it was annoying. I mean, a lot of the names were really terrible, but he said after a while it accomplished, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it accomplished the point that I was trying to get to by engaging with the nicknames, because you hear these names, Oliver Cowdery and Lyman Johnson and Luke Johnson and John Johnson and Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young and Orrin Porter Rockwell and Amasa Lyman and Newell K. Whitney and Frederick G. Williams and Edward Partridge and Parley Pratt and Orson Hyde. And you hear all of these names and you just don't know who we're talking about. I don't know about you, but anytime when I was in church, hearing a story from the history, I would hear one of these names and say, is that a name I've heard before? Yeah, I think it is. Okay, yeah. I don't know anything about that person. I don't know anything else that person has ever done in the history, but right now you're telling me a story about something they did, so I'm gonna buy it. It's because they weren't actual characters existing in my mind. They were just a name. They were just a name on a piece of paper or on a chalkboard. They were just a protagonist in a story. That's all. They weren't a human being. They weren't the engaging and dynamic package that is a human being. They were just a person's name. And Doug made the point. He said, having the nicknames helps me remember, I remember back when we were talking about Oliver Cowdery, getting the priesthood back with Joseph Smith in episode, I'm throwing it out there, 12, and blah, 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 we're able to use, not so smarty Marty. Oh, yeah, right. He was the dumb guy that went and walking through the woods and talked to Jesus in the form of a deer. And he was playing with a snake during Zion's camp and got bit on the toe because he thought that snakes and poison couldn't hurt him, thanks to Joseph Smith. He's the crazy guy who said that I never saw the plates the way that I, see them as that pencil case on the desk, but I saw them the way I see a city through a mountain, and dropped the mic and left. That's who we're talking about. These are fun people. These are engaging individuals. And they all have a story to tell. I was in a conversation with my dad quite some time ago. And, he had taught middle school, and he would see on Facebook little spats and stupid things that people were posting up on Facebook at the time. Pictures of them and their friends doing something stupid, or, a little fight between two girls at school or whatever, and one of them calls the other one names. And he made the case that person's daughter isn't going to want to see that when they get older. They're not going to want to see the fight that their mom was having in 7th grade with this little girl. And her daughter's not going to want to see that. And I took a step back and I said, Dad, are you kidding me? I would love to see a Facebook page of Joseph Smith. I mean, that's kind of the logical conclusion of this conversation. My mind just instantly voiped to. But how great would it be if we could see the day-to-day life of the people we're discussing in Mormon history? Where we look at Facebook or at Twitter like something that's just superfluous in social media, and it's just, it's good for networking or free advertising, whatever the case may be. But we don't think about the broader social impact of every person on Facebook documenting every step of their life, taking selfies with the people they were spending time with, and tagging the people's photos and putting a place and a date and a time on it. Posting up an article that they read on Facebook, and say they put a 2 or 3 page blurb in addition to their their own personal thoughts, in addition to whatever this article was that they posted. This Mormon historians group that I'm part of is great for that, because it's constantly flooded with people coming up with a certain analysis of something that they consumed on the internet, and their own personal thoughts and opinions on this subject. And people do it all the time with politics, or with religion, or with cars, or with, skateboarding, or whatever the case may be. People post things up on their Facebook profile, and it's a reflection of who they are as a human being. It teaches us who those people are. There's a reason why bosses frequently log onto somebody's Facebook page before they actually hire them. They get a resume, pull up their Facebook page, and if there's, pictures that are, terrible on there, you might not get the job. Why do they do that? Well, because Facebook is a snapshot of a person's life. And you get to know somebody's Facebook page, you get to know a lot about them really, really fast. And that made me think, what if my grandma had a Facebook page? Let's not go all the way back to Joseph Smith's time. What if my grandma, growing up in Canada at the age of 9, would have had a Facebook page that I could look back on, and I could see this information. I could see who she was as a person. When I was a child growing up in the summertime, I would frequently go to our family ranch and spend summers with Grandma. That's just what our summers were. We just went to Grandma's house at our family ranch. That's where I would hang out with these cousins. That's where I would spend time with these people and get to learn who they are. But, Grandma was just always Grandma to me. She was, she was the one who would, lay next to us in bed and tell us stories for hours on end. She was the one who had the awesome house with the exercise equipment in the basement. She was the one who would take us to church every Sunday, and she's the one that would occasionally thunk us on the head with her giant ruby ring if we were being too loud in church. She was the one that, when she moved to Salt Lake, we would spend the weekend at Grandma's house just so we could go swimming all day, every day in the swimming pool that's in her apartment complex. We'd bring friends over to Grandma's house, and, she'd just feed us nothing but sugar and salt and energy the whole weekend and then send us back home to our parents with us being fried and exhausted from not having much sleep and having spent the whole weekend eating terrible food and swimming the whole time. You know, grandma is just grandma, right? Everybody has their grandma stories, for those of you who know your grandma. But I still don't feel like I know who the real grandma was. And at the eulogy of the funeral, I think it was beautiful because, you know, my grandma said before she died that I don't want any sobbing or boo-hooing at my funeral. I want it to be a celebration. And that's what we did, damn it. That's what we did. We celebrated my grandma's life. The eulogy was done by her brother, and it was a beautiful eulogy. He had some of my family members write personal stories of things that they remember, you know, fun stories about my grandma that they wanted to be chronicled in the eulogy. And it was beautiful. It was absolutely wonderful to hear those stories about my grandma that I've never heard before. And to have the audience full of people that were laughing instead of crying was beautiful in and of itself. I just wish that I could know my grandma at a deeper level. It's not something that I can do now that she's gone. I can't look back and say, well, I really wish I would have asked her about her life a little more. I'll never be able to go back and ask her questions about what it was like to meet my grandpa. Or to grow up in frontier life Canada. What it was like to go to BYU and move out to the ranch and begin a life there with her husband. I'll never be able to go back in time and ask her to tell me stories about my family members, about my cousins or my aunts and uncles, my grandpa. I'll never be able to go back and ask her. Because she's gone. And that's a fact of life at this point. My grandma was 86. She lived a beautiful, full life. And she was constantly surrounded by people that loved her so much. She had an absolutely great life. She lived very comfortably. She grew up in the Great Depression era. She's part of the greatest generation of all time. She lived at a time when the global economy was hinging upon the American economy. She grew up in a time when she could pay hospital bills with the little bit of change in her purse. She grew up when she could live off of $100 a month, and that was rent, food, and everything, while paying for tuition to go to college. And unfortunately, now that she's dead, those memories go with her. Now, if you have the same belief system as everybody in that chapel except myself had, you know, you're going to die however long, you know, and your stint in this mortal coil is past, and you will continue on into the great paradise, to paradisiacal glory. And you'll be able to see Grandma in her prime. You'll be able to hug her again, talk to her, and ask her about that time she accidentally got shot when she was 7 years old. I mean, but if you have a lack of belief system like myself, you get one shot. Man, when somebody's gone, that's simply it. You don't get to go back and say, oh, I wish I would have asked. I wish I would have said. I wish I would have thought. I wish this. I wish that. You can't go back. And I'm not saying that it's worth living with regrets, because it's horrible. Don't live with regrets. If you regret something, don't do it again. It's fixed. But if you have a chance to take some advice from somebody who has gone past a point and they can look back on it and say that they have no regrets from something, do it. And this is my point of advice to all of you. The vast majority of people listening to this podcast right now have a parent, a grandparent, a great-grandparent who have lived a full and meaningful life, and their brain is just teeming with wonderful stories, and they want, God, our grandparents want to tell us so much about their history. They want to tell stories to us if we'll just sit down and listen. And my grandma always wanted to talk. She always wanted to tell a story to one of us kids. And now the majority of you're in the same position that I was in 6 months ago. I took an opportunity to do something with my grandma, and I am so glad that I did now, because I've spent all day now going through it, and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. 6 months ago, in April, I sat down with my grandma because she was about to go into to get a surgery, a shoulder surgery, and it was feared by the doctor that she might not wake up out of the surgery just because she's feeble, She's 86 years old at the time, well, almost 86. So I sat down with her and I set up a microphone and I said, "Grandma, I love you so much and I want to hear your story. You have been studying genealogy and Mormon history for the past 16, 17 years now. I want to know what you know." I did about 4 or 5 hours of prep time in researching and studying up on the work that she's done up to this point. And then I sat down with a microphone on a table next to her, and I talked to her for 4 hours straight. I came out with 2.5 hours of recordings. And wow, it's been an interesting day today, going through this audio, because I've been tightening it up and extracting little clips here and there. It's made me think a lot about the time that I had with my grandma. If anything, it's made me appreciate the time so much more, because I got to hear her voice again. I got to have a conversation with her again. I got to learn what she told me when we first sat down again. The information that she put onto that microphone, the information that was recorded into my computer, it's never going away. It's one thing to read journals and to, hear about people's stories in history, whether it's relevant to Mormonism or not. It's one thing to just read that and get a feeling for the person's language and how they were able to express their thoughts in the written form, and it's great. But that holds nothing to sitting down and talking with these people. My grandma had no idea how to use a microphone. She used her computer for a whole 3 things: writing her own journal, transcribing her grandma's journals, and posting up to the church's website her genealogy work. That's the only thing she ever used her computer for. She didn't know how to set up Audacity and a microphone. All it took was for me to come along with a microphone that I bought for $30 from Radio Shack and a free program, Audacity, on my computer. And I set it up on the table and I said, "Grandma, can I please talk to you?" And she lit up. I have never in my 25 years of existence on this planet seen my grandma so happy as when I saw her talking about her life's work. There was a certain glint in her eye. The majority of the time spent in the last 45 minutes of the recording is her saying, "Do you have any more questions for me?" Because she was so elated to share her life's work with me. And she was, I think, that excited because I was actually showing interest in it. I was asking her deep questions. I had done the research ahead of time, so I knew where I wanted the conversation to go and how I wanted to talk to her, the specific points I wanted to discuss. And the conversation just went beautifully. It flowed perfectly. She was excited. She was sharing everything that she has been working on for the past 30 years of her life. All with somebody she loves. And it was amazing. This little Bryce that she had, spent a lot of time raising, she had been telling me stories about, fairies and Fantasyland and, teaching me how to swim and how to dive, teaching me all these fun things that are essential as a kid, coming back to her 20 years later and saying, "Grandma, I want to hear a story. But I want it to be from you, and I want it to be real. I want you to tell me what really happened. Tell me about your time growing up in Alberta. Tell me about your studying of history. Tell me about William Moroni Palmer, your grandpa. Tell me about his dad, Abraham Palmer, the first person in our family line to join Mormonism." I'm just thinking back on it right now, and I'm absolutely overwhelmed by it. It's been a very good day going through this audio and listening to her again. And I'm going to play some of it. And I'm not doing it because, for nefarious purposes. I'm not doing this because I'm an anti-Mormon and I'm saying, "Oh, look what this Mormon believes. I can't believe." No. I'm doing it for posterity's sake. Because right now, we are all living in the first generation where people's memories don't have to die with them. We can sit down and put a microphone in somebody's face and talk to them about their childhood. And we're not reading it from a newspaper article. We're not reading it from a journal. We're hearing them talk about it. We're hearing the excitement and the inflection in their voices. And it will be on the internet for the foreseeable future. How wonderful and how privileged are we to live in a day and age where this is possible. The rest of this episode is going to be a few highlights from my conversation with my grandma. Now, when I first started the podcast, I never would have felt comfortable doing this. I had begun with the false assumption that I would somehow be able to keep my podcast life and my personal life separate, but that's simply not how this works. You're my family. You don't keep your life separate with your family. You tell them everything. I hope everybody understands that this has been the most cathartic thing I have done in my life. This is one of the few things that I have done on my own that I'm proud of. This is one thing that I can look back and say, I am glad that I took the hours to sit down and talk with my grandma so that we can hear her voice forever. I don't know how long of snippets I'm going to play. I recorded 2.5 hours with her. I might play 5 minutes. I might play 25 minutes. I'm not sure. I'm just recording this right now and thinking through all of the clips that I have saved on here. They're just amazing. And I hope you as the listener don't feel like this is getting too personal or like this is overstepping some kind of boundary in the podcasting world or, broaching some kind of Zion's curtain that shouldn't be punctured. I hope you feel like this is my petition to you and my example to you to do what I did. Please, everybody listening, do this with your grandparents, your parents, whoever you possibly can, because we will not regret it in the future. Generations of human beings in 1,000 years will thank us for getting these recordings. Now, I'm going to send a copy of this to the Library of Congress, where it will be digitized forever, and essentially immortalized. So my grandma's thoughts and her stories are never going to go away. They will always be accessible to human beings. We, as in our generation, owe this to our ancestors. But more than that, we owe it to the legacy of the technological revolution. We're now in a time where this is actually possible. Why wouldn't we take advantage of it? She's passed, and it's days after her funeral. I'm able to sit back in my chair and pull open a program and listen to her voice again. I can listen to her saying my name again. I can listen to her happiness and excitement as she regales me with these stories. And that being said, without further ado, I give you Norma.
So after that, I spent a year there. Then I was very homesick, so I went back to Canada for the summer. And then I went to BYU the next year.
And that's where you met Harvey,
and
right?
That's the third year, my third year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
but
I mean,
the second
we should.
year, I was able to stay in the dorms, and I had a ball.
Well, yeah, I
did.
was gonna say. I mean, you've been in and out of school for many times during your life, as far as I'm aware. Is that correct? And I mean,
I don't know.
Okay.
I went to school till I graduated.
Yeah, well,
for my first degree.
Your first degree, but I mean,
Yeah.
you have.
Then I went back to BYU
a couple
and got
of
my
degrees, right?
Yeah, I went back to BYU and got my master's in speech pathology and audiology.
Okay.
Then I went back to get my doctor's in counseling to counsel those people.
Okay.
But I didn't quite get that. So.
Okay, but I mean, needless to say, you are very, very educated, and
well,
it's obviously
I've done whatever.
it's obviously helped a lot in the work that you've done.
The Collisters, they wanted to pay me more because I was doing so much, and I says no. I agreed to do it for this amount, and that's what I'm going to do it for.
Wow, okay.
And so she says okay. And then when I went to BYU, she sent me $100 every month.
Oh, wow.
And that helped me live in a wonderful apartment and have a wonderful time. I was in the, let's see. Oh, what are the women called, the girls called?
The sorority houses?
No, it wasn't a sorority, but it was... it'll come to me in just a second. Anyway, I did all the fun things, with the important things and fun things and I even went with the president of the student body. I was at Popular or had so much fun or whatever. But anyway, I did have a wonderful time there. Then the next year, I went to an apartment because it was cheaper, and that's when I met Harvey. He had an apartment below. We 6 girls had an apartment above, and there were a bunch of boys in an apartment below, and Harvey was one of those. Okay. So, but my dad had, one time I went home to Dad, and I says, Dad, the men I'm dating seem so shallow. I want someone, I want to meet really good men or something to that effect. So he gave me a blessing promising me that I would know when I met this man that he was the one I was going to marry. Wow. Well, I went back to the school happy as can be, and I met Harvey, and I did not like him. And when I went out with him the first time, I came back, I was crying, and my roommate says, you don't have to marry him, Norma. I says, yes, but I do.
Wow.
So, but anyway, he gave me a ring before long, and I wouldn't wear it. So he says, well, just keep it and we'll see. And so I did. And then I had a lump in my breast and had to go in the hospital and have this lump removed, which was benign. Okay. But Harvey paid for, I had to pay to get out of and I didn't have the money with me at that time. So he paid my hospital, which was $30-some-odd at that time.
But for a college student, that's $30 is a bit of money.
The thing is, I didn't have the money with me. I just had to go home, and so I was able to pay him back when I got home. But that was so kind of him that I decided I'd marry him. Wow! So that's what
just a hospital bill.
Yeah, but it was so good of him to do that. Yeah. to help me out for no reason at all.
And it sounds like he had the Blankenegel persistence of, well, you don't want to marry me? Just hang on to this ring for a little while.
So I put the ring on.
Oh, wow. He got you.
Anyway, then one time at BYU, Harvey was in his class, and his teacher was in the office right next to the class with the door open.
Okay.
And a man came in, he says, it was Charlie Red, actually, who was a neighbor
Charlie
down at the ranch. And he says, I want the best student you've got. Well, Harvey Blankenegel's the best student we have. We want him married. He's married. We want, and so on and so forth. And here all the kids were snickering and laughing at Harvey. And Harvey was there blushing, I'm sure. And but anyway, he heard his whole life worked out right there in front of me.
No kidding. And he's just like, well, I guess this is what I'm doing now.
But anyway, it was wonderful because we went down to Rattlesnake Ranch. And after he graduated...
So hang on, this is about 1951 or 2?
Yes, You're really with it. 51. These Palmers came to Hans Mill when the Hans Mill massacre happened.
No kidding.
And when this happened...
Because they were in Missouri at the time,
yeah, but
right?
they were at this stream. They were going to Nauvoo. They were on their way to Nauvoo.
Okay.
And they stopped at this stream to wash their clothes and such. And while they were doing this, the Hans Mill massacre happened. And the women, now Grandma has a wonderful diary. You ought to get in touch with that. In fact, I've got it written.
Yes.
Anyway, she and the children and all of the other women ran into the woods with bare feet. They didn't even stop to put their shoes on, the children.
Wow.
And the mothers would stop every once in a while and put down their clothes so the children could step on them because their bleeding feet.
Oh, my goodness.
And then the grandfather and our great-grandfather went up into, this was William, he went up in to help them, and the others realized someone was coming to help, so they took off. And when they got there, they had found all these people that were dead. But this, this one that was, you've heard of this one, what was his name? That anyway, his hip was blown away, and his mother prayed, "What can I do?" And she knew what to do, and she put some sort of moss or something in his hip joint, and it healed that up. Wow. But our grandmother from the Thurston line married this man that was hurt, and she says, I've read her history, and she says that he went on numerous missions, walking all over the country.
So this was
and
a man
never had any trouble.
That was shot in Hans Mill massacre,
right?
And he
married into our family, Thurston family. And I'm trying to think of his name. You'll find it when you go to that history.
Definitely. Yeah. Tell us
Hans
exactly
Mill
what
massacre.
This is. Okay.
In that tragic happening, Amanda Smith lost her husband and her son.
Okay, hang on.
Sardius
Before reading
Smith.
anymore, is this a journal entry or what is this that we're hearing here?
This is from my research.
Oh, from your research.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
So her husband, Amanda Smith, lost her husband and her son Sardius Smith. Her younger son Alma was savagely wounded. In the darkness, she carried him from the mill to a shelter in the brush. His hip joint had been shot away.
This is Alma. Okay.
Through the night, she cried out in prayer, "Oh, my Heavenly Father, what shall I do? Thou seest my poor wounded boy, and knowest my inexperience. O Heavenly Father, direct me what to do." She later recorded in her journal concerning what happened, "I was directed as by a voice speaking to me. The ashes of the fire were still smoldering. She had been burning the bark of the the bark of the something, S-H-A-G, shag, and bark, hickory bark.
Oh, sage, maybe? Sage?
Could be.
Sorry.
Anyway, I was directed to take those ashes to make a lye and put a cloth saturated with it right into the wound.
Oof.
It hurt, but little Alma
Yeah.
was too near dead to heed it much.
Wow.
Again and again I saturated the cloth and pot and put it into the hole of the hip joint. Having done as directed, I again prayed to the Lord and was again instructed as distinctly as though a physician had been standing by speaking to me. Nearby was a slippery elm tree. From this I was told to make a slippery elm poultice and fill the wound with it. She was able to get the wounded boy to a house. With a mother's love and faith, she said to him, "The Lord can make something there in place of the hip." She had him lie on his face, and there he remained while a miracle occurred. Of that miracle she wrote. So Alma laid on his face for 5 weeks until he was entirely recovered, a flexible gristle having grown in place of the missing joint.
Wow.
A socket which remains to this day, a marvel to physicians.
Wow.
Alma's mother reported that Alma fully recovered, never limped, filled a mission, and went on to live a rich, full life, all because a mother had the faith to take God at His word and to claim and act on gifts that He had told her were hers by right. And this is from Hinckley, Rise to the Stature of the Divine Within You. And signed November 1989.
Jeez.
Isn't that wonderful?
That is amazing.
Now here's a dear son Harvey. This is from his father, I believe, or mother. Yeah, it was Emil.
This is a letter
This
to...
is from Emil.
Okay.
Nobody has this but me, so
To
I'm
Harvey.
glad
This is to-
this is dear son Harvey.
Wow, from Emil to Harvey.
Yes, this is March 21st, 1934.
Wow.
Yes,
And
this.
how old was Harvey at this time? I mean,
Well, I was
7
4,
years old.
so Harvey would have been 8, 9,
9 years old. Wow.
10.
I love this. I love this so
yes,
much.
this is the first letter I've ever written you. How are you feeling? Okay? Did you ever get where you can run on roller skates? Saw John Blankenegel in town last Saturday. Said he'd written you a letter, but it's hard come back to him as he didn't have your street address. Saw AF, I don't know that, at the ranch last Saturday. He looked real good. Julian Judd's... Julian feeds him a little. Guess it won't be very long until we will all be together again. Are you going to school? I'm sending you $1 bill. Give 50 cents of it to your sister Dorothy, and please try and be nice to her. Don't quarrel with her all the time. Also mind your mother and help her whenever you can. With love, your dad, Emil. Say hello to Mother, Dorothy, and John.
Wow.
Isn't that fun?
A letter from the 1950s from my
Yeah.
great-grandpa to his son,
Yeah.
my grandpa. Got to Utah.
I want to go now to John Taylor Henninger Jr.,
J.T. Henninger Jr.
and his mother was Mary Susanna Ivy.
Okay, so J.T. Henninger Jr. is your grandfather.
Right. And my great-grandmother was Mary Susanna Ivy,
Okay.
and she was from Provo, Utah. And her father was John Lehigh Ivy, Colonel John Lehigh Ivy, and his father was James Russell Ivy.
Okay.
Now, James Russell was killed in the field, and they took all his clothes off except his boots. They couldn't get his boots off. The Indians did.
Oh, really?
So he was killed for his clothes.
No kidding.
Anyway, now, John Lehigh Ivy and James Ivy, his father, went to back east. No, I'm sorry. They were called to go to Moab
Moab.
and settle there, or to
Wow.
set it up there.
I mean, we're talking
So,
1860s,
yeah.
maybe? 1850s,
Well, this
60s?
is 1833, so he would have been about
33.
18...
Oh, he was born in 33.
So
Okay.
it would have been about 1853 or so.
Okay.
And his
Wow.
father, and they came to Moab, and they thought that the LaSalles, they named the LaSalle because they thought they were, what is it? I can't remember. I'll get that soon. Anyway, they came into Moab, and they couldn't ride down because of the wagons, so they walked their horses down, and then they lowered the wagons down.
Wow.
With ropes. Down
Wow.
into Moab. So, and what's really interesting is I was asked to do a history of the Monticello stake.
Okay.
And that included Moab. Now I thought, why me?
Right.
I'm just new to this area. And I found that my ancestors were the first into Moab.
To settle.
And they didn't settle there. They just went and set it up and fought the Indians and stuff until they finally it got big enough they could handle it. The people handle it themselves.
Wow.
And also John Lehi Ivy and what was I going to say? Anyway. Oh, yeah, they came to Moab, and then I found that Monticello and Blanding people, I had relatives from the Walton family that came in that side.
Okay.
So here I had some of the very first people into Moab and Monticello into the San Juan stake. And they asked me to write the book, and there it is right there.
Wow.
I have the book there. You won't have time to read it, but anyway.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope this hasn't been too personal, but what can I say? I don't hold anything back from my family. I didn't do this because I want people to send in messages and say, sorry your grandma passed. I did this because I want everybody to take a step back and ask themselves, who in my life do I need to do this same thing with? It's not hard. Just sit down with an elderly loved one, a member that could not be here in a decade. Sit with them and ask them these questions. Ask them to tell you about their childhood. They are begging for somebody to listen. And it's our duty to our generations of descendants to get this information digitalized, to immortalize it in ones and zeros forever. Thank you for listening.
Bryce, I've got a lot of wonderful things here, and the very special one is this very last one. It shows your relationship to the different leaders of the church, the kings and queens of the world, and so on, and it is wonderful. So
Amazing.
Enjoy. This is just a lot of research that's been done.
This is amazing. So the piece of paper that I'm looking at right now shows how Norma Ruth Palmer is related to various people here. And of course, I'm just,
Right.
2 generations removed from that is all.
So you're related to all those people too.
This is just a quick rap sheet here. We have Brigham Young is the 6th cousin 2 times removed.
Mm-hmm.
Ezra Taft Benson, 8th cousin once removed. George Albert Smith is just the 7th cousin, which he was a descendant of George A. Smith, who was on Zion's camp as well, if I'm not mistaken. Harold B. Lee, 7th cousin, 1 time removed. Heber J. Grant, 7th cousin, twice removed. Howard W. Hunter, 15th cousin, twice removed. Joseph Smith, 6th cousin, 2 times removed.
Isn't that neat?
Joseph F. Smith, 7th cousin, 1 time removed.
But you're Joseph Smith.
6th cousin, twice removed.
You were related to him.
The Joseph Smith.
Right. So you can be very, very thankful for your relationship to some of these great people. Then it goes on to the kings of the world, too, and queens of the world.
And there, you gave me 30 pages of documents of that I can't wait to
So you're going to have fun with that.
But that's, I just kind of want to wrap the whole conversation up into, try and draw a circle around everything we've talked about. And, this is, obviously I'm very fascinated with history.
Yeah, and that's good.
You are quite as well.
Yeah.
I can tell. And seeing such recent history, seeing how we're so closely and tightly connected with these people.
With the whole world.
Yeah, with the whole world, definitely. But with this subsect of history that I've been studying so much recently, seeing how close it is, how much it affects my very close ancestors, it's a very interesting personal connection to the history that I feel, and it makes the history much more real and much more beautiful.
Another thing, just the fact that these people are all leaders shows that you're a leader. It's in your blood. You have that ability because it's handed down through all these great people.
DNA is an interesting thing, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yes. But just to kind of complete the 2.5 hours that we've been recording here, can I just have you, share any final thoughts that you have and anything that you just like to tell anybody?
The main thing I want with all my research is to have everyone give it to their sons and daughters so that every generation knows all the information that I have gleaned through my life.
And you have done a lot of work.
I've enjoyed it too.
In the stuff that we have been looking at today, the documents and the papers that we've been looking at,
Yeah.
I am endlessly astonished at how much work you have done in your research.
Thank you.
I cannot thank you.
If I hadn't enjoyed it so much, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Probably
But
not.
I really enjoyed
would
it.
have been doing something else. But I mean, I don't think people give you enough thanks for what you've done. So Grandma, thank you so very much.
Thank you, my darling. I don't need thanks. I just want you to carry on the things that I have done.
I wouldn't do it unless I enjoyed it.
That's absolutely right. But
Awesome.
you've got a history behind you
I
that
do.
shows you will enjoy it.
Absolutely. And, I got a grandma to teach me the ropes of it too, so.
Now, you told me to say my name again.
Yes, I was hoping you'd say your
Norma,
name.
Norma Ruth Palmer Blankenagel. I'm almost 86. In July, I'll be 86.
And that's in just a couple months here.
Yeah.
And today, just for the record, today is April 23rd, 2016. That's when we're recording
2016,
this.
right.
Yeah. And it's
I was born in 30, so it's easy to know
easy.
the years.
Easy enough. Awesome. Well, Grandma, once again, thank you so much, not only for
thank
doing
you.
the research, but for taking the time to sit down here with a microphone in your face and just
pass this on. Pass this on.
And this is going to go out to the internet. This is going to be
good.
made available in the Library of Congress. It's going to be
To my children
anybody
and
that would
grandchildren.
ever want to hear the stories and regalings that Norma Palmer can offer the world. It's going to be available to them.
Good.
That's the beauty of the digital age. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Grandma.
Thank you, my dear.